said I should do. There we go.
Good.
We are ready to start.
All right. Well, I don't know where Bill is on your screen, but he's on the bottom left on mine. So Bill, wave your hand. There he is. Bill Schmidt. Bill, this is just about 2 years anniversary of your coming to UMCS, right?
That's correct.
So I didn't ask him what he wanted me to say by way of introduction, but I should say he comes to UMCS as a return home to Milwaukee after a round the world stint at Catholic Relief Services. Do I have that right?
That's correct.
Yeah. So we're so happy to have him, but now I'm going to embarrass him by saying, since he came to UMCS, all of the 4 different housing LLCs that have low-income housing in them have dramatically turned around in their financial stability, and I'm crediting that to Bill and his staff. So a lot of changes took place, some courageous changes. They brought the management of all those LLCs in-house and have hired great people to work there, and things are really turning around, and I'm giving the credit to Bill for that, for sure. And I think 2 years, you probably got your feet down, right, Bill? Oh,
Maybe not.
Bill?
I'm back now.
I said you probably got your feet down, but he certainly is. I asked him tonight to maybe talk a little bit about what UMCS is up to now, because some of us will really appreciate an update on that and give you an idea of what's happening there. And then talk a little bit about low-income housing and the plight of people who cannot afford housing, as he sees it from the point of view in the Washington Park area, which is where UMCS is located. So with that, I'll let you take it away, Bill.
Well,
Great.
this Bill is going to jump in and just say that Ann has been talking about you, praising you for the 2 years that we have been dealing with this topic. And so it's a delight to meet you. Happy to have you with us.
Well, thank you, Bill. And thank you, Ann and Doug, for the invitation here too. And I know I cut out there just a little bit, so I apologize if that happens again. I'm down in the basement here as well. We've got some pretty good wind whipping around out there. But yeah, so I think maybe what I can do is exactly what Ann just suggested I do, which is always good advice, I think. So as Ann was indicating, I grew up in the Milwaukee area, Wauwatosa. My folks and sisters and their families, and my brother just moved back from New York, so everyone's still in the same general area. And I went to Marquette University and then UW-Madison for graduate school, and ended up going, as Ann was describing, I studied international affairs and went out to DC, and I tried to get involved in the kind of international humanitarian field, and was fortunate enough to get an opportunity with Catholic Relief Services, and ended up spending 13 years overseas almost exclusively, although I made it home for every Christmas. Otherwise my mother would have disowned me. But yeah, I got to live and work in places like Afghanistan on a couple of different occasions, and Haiti after the earthquake, and spent some time in Nicaragua and Indonesia. And then most recently, before moving back to Milwaukee, I was stationed in southern Turkey near the border with Syria, where we and a number of other agencies have pretty large scale relief operations going related to the crisis in Syria. And it was actually in Turkey where I read Evicted. And I remember just being completely struck by how little I knew about the housing situation in my hometown of Milwaukee. And just being really, I mean, you've read it obviously too, and I mean, it's pretty grim stuff in a lot of ways. And even though there are some moments of humanity and kindness that come shining through. And I remember thinking that when I was going to move back, I wanted in some way to get involved in learning more about the housing crisis, and it is a real crisis that we have in the city of Milwaukee around housing for low-income families, and especially for families that are not just low income, but face different challenges, whether it's around mental or behavioral health, which United Methodist Children Services has a specific program in partnership with Milwaukee County to try and provide services to families who have a head of household with a mental or behavioral health diagnosis. And so little did I know when I came back that I was continuing to work remotely for some time, and I met somebody who was a close friend and colleague of one of our board members, and they told me that UMCS was looking for an interim director, and they need someone to come help out for 3 months, and would you be interested in exploring the opportunity? And sure enough, that was, as Ann was saying, 2 years ago. And so, you know, that short stint as the interim director was really eye-opening, and certainly I think, like Ann, who has been such a vital contributor to the UMCS housing program and the agency for so long, is also in the same way, like, really attracted to the mission of what the agency does across the range of programs that we have, but I think fundamentally and especially so related to our housing program. So a little bit about that. UMCS was founded in 1962, and early on had programs in both Madison and then shortly thereafter in the Milwaukee area. A lot of different interventions over the years I've come to learn, but pretty much from the early days, there was an emphasis on trying to provide assistance to unwed mothers and children who are growing up in those single family situations. And in the early 1990s, when UMCS shifted its base of operations to the Washington Park area, where we still are on 39th and Lisbon, just next to beautiful Washington Park itself, that housing mission began to take even greater roots, I would say. And so there was a transitional housing program for many, many years in the historical building that you will all recognize from driving past or being inside of it probably too. Almost 100 years old. And that building has 18 apartments. And that was the original location of the transitional housing program. So basically, when we say transitional housing, we're talking about families, usually single mother-led families who are coming from a situation of extreme distress. Maybe it was homelessness, maybe it was an abusive situation, maybe it was a combination of factors, loss of employment or mental health issues as well too. And their housing is severely compromised. And so that transitional program is focused on getting some stability for those families. And then with the team of UMCS staff and other partners to, especially from a social work perspective, to help each of those families develop a plan for eventually transitioning out into their own more permanent housing situation. As the years went on, and especially under the leadership of Perry Hike, who I'm sure some of you know, the longtime executive director at UMCS, the agency decided to expand its housing program. And so not just to be able to provide services on a kind of an emergency or acute transitional basis, but also to be able to provide more stable, permanent housing always with an emphasis on families too. And so from the early 2000s until the current day, but really from the early 2000s up until about 2012, the agency acquired land and developed some of our own housing programs. And so at this moment, the transitional program went away, and we now focus on permanent housing. Although there is still an element of helping families who come in work through some of the challenges that they are facing when they come to be a part of our community, and helping them maybe to get on to the next phase in whatever life holds in store for them, whether it's moving from a small apartment into a single family home that they rent, or even in some of the more successful situations, moving from rental housing, which we offer, into home ownership as well. So currently we have 4 different projects, and those operate as projects because they were either acquired by the agency or developed at different times. And so they have different tax credit investors, because 3 of the 4 projects were developed with what are called low-income housing tax credits. So this is a national program in scale that is operated at the state level in all 50 states. And in the state of Wisconsin, the agency that oversees that program partnered with UMCS on 3 different occasions to develop some of our projects. And so in addition to having the state agency that oversees those programs and the tax credit investors, which are usually banks, but they could be other types of financial institutions who are incentivized to provide funding for these developments because it's the right thing to do. There is a social mission to that for some, but also the banks and financial institutions that provide funding for low-income housing get those tax credits then. And it also helps boost their rankings in what's called the Community Reinvestment Act. So all banks get a CRA score, and the better your CRA score, the more likely you can win approval for maybe a new merger or acquisition, or setting up a new branch in a different neighborhood or community around the state too. In addition to those institutions, we also have our lenders too. And so all of these different agencies, and there are other partners who we work with on the housing too, they have different objectives and different missions, and a lot of them are financially driven. I mean, the bottom line is very much important, as it is for us as an agency too. We want to be good stewards of resources and manage our programs efficiently, but we also, as I came to learn very quickly, getting caught up to speed with Ann and the other members of our housing task force, our mission to provide real quality, compassionate care and services to our families sometimes means that those dual objectives of making sure we can pay the bills and the investors are happy with the occupancy and the rate of return on housing, and sometimes that doesn't always run in perfect alignment with what is the human concern of serving the families that are in our care. And it's an awesome responsibility to have those families in our care too. So within those 72 units, we have 52 apartments. Most of them are 3-bedroom apartments, although we have a number of 2-bedroom apartments in the older building. And then we have a total of 20 townhomes. And they are all located within basically a 2-3 block radius of our headquarters. So we're on site, and so we have interaction on a daily basis with most of our residents, which, you know, some days they love and other days they wish we were, you know, working from another neighborhood probably. we there's not a lot that goes by that we don't catch, at least, you know, between the hours of 8 and 5:30, or, you know, whenever it is we leave. You know, many of our residents are referred to us through different partnerships that we have with other agencies, including, as I mentioned, Milwaukee County Housing Division and the Milwaukee County Behavioral Health Division as well. So 15 of our units are reserved for that partnership, in which for many, many years, the head of household in those units would have been diagnosed at some point with a mental or behavioral health concern. And so we have a special obligation for those families, and our director of housing and social services, Leah Lavin Wilson, who's been with the agency for 14 years now, and is a social worker, and she's a special person, and I, you know, I don't think the program isn't successful without somebody like her as the backbone for it. Obviously, it's a huge team effort, and there's a lot that goes into it, with support from all of our supporters from around the state, especially within the United Methodist Church community, from our board, from our task force members, of which Ann's been a member for a long, long time, and then all of the staff. But Leah brings a real special element in terms of the kind of really professional and compassionate care that we can provide to families. And there's a need for it. There's a need for a lot of compassion and care, but also patience and understanding, and refusing to like give in to cynicism or judgmental ways of thinking, which isn't always easy, but that's a big part of what we do. And very recently, and then I'll take a little bit of a pause here to allow for questions and dialogue, and certainly I can go into more detail on any of these elements, but recently, and I think it really accelerated too, although it was definitely in the works before the onset of the pandemic, and I think probably, if we're being totally honest, it got a little bit of a boost as well in the run up to what we all anticipated would be the hosting of the Democratic National Convention last year. There was a renewed emphasis on addressing the issues of homelessness in the city of Milwaukee. And so, whereas in the past it was a given that our referrals for many of those units would be for mental behavioral health diagnoses, it began to transition to more of an emphasis on addressing and providing stable housing for families that were either recently homeless or were homeless, or were at really heightened risk of falling into or lapsing back into homelessness. So over the last 6 to 9 months, I would say, in particular, we've been really blessed to be able to open up our apartments to a number of families who fall into that category. And so that's been a real, it's been a real special and challenging development for the agency, but one that certainly aligns very wonderfully with our mission to serve. And so, yeah, and then, okay, maybe one more thing, and then I will take a break. As Ann alluded to as well, for many, many years, the UMCS provided all of the different supportive services. So Leah is the social worker and kind of the day-to-day troubleshooter and helping families develop a plan for the way forward. But also the on-site daycare facility that we have and that continues to operate, which is a wonderful resource, not just for our families who live in our housing, but for the neighborhood. And we have, as you know, the emergency food pantry and senior stock box program that we have in partnership with Hunger Task Force, and that is sustained and supported so vitally by so many different congregations throughout the greater Milwaukee area and beyond. And then in addition to that, we've got our community health worker and community organizer on staff here too, and they contribute to all sorts of fun and worthwhile programming and activities that families can take part into, whether it's our community garden, which is right across the street from our parking lot and which looks beautiful these days. This rain we've been having lately is good for it as well too. But also we have like weekly walking clubs, and we had a graduation party barbecue for all of our graduating 8th graders and high school students in the housing. And of course we had a Bucks party as well, a little Bucks barbecue to celebrate the championship there, which was a lot of fun for everyone around too. So all those programs continue to go, but one of the real anchors, I think, on the program, and I got a real clear and early sense of that when I started, was the really troubled relationship that we had with our property management company. So we have for many years utilized external property management companies, and there were a whole host of problems, and at the risk of like bringing up past trauma for Ann and myself, I would kind of glaze over them. But needless to say, like, we did not have mission alignment with those companies. They were not performing well. Occupancy rates were very low. Residents were not happy with the kind of service that they were getting. And all in all, it was bad. It was bad for us as an agency, for our reputation, and certainly for the bottom line too. And we looked at a number of different options to make some changes, but ultimately we recognized that to do this right and to do this in the way that we felt would be consistent with what we're called to do and what the agency's mission is, we knew we had to do it ourselves. So we went through a really long process of developing a plan and convincing all of our lenders and our tax credit investors and everyone else involved with Milwaukee County and other partners that we could do this, because we didn't have, we weren't a licensed property management firm, and I don't think it's something that is very common. But nonetheless, we took the plunge, and it's been a ton of work, and maybe a few additional sleepless nights here and there, but all in all, it has been the right decision without a doubt. And we've managed to, together as a team, I think, make some really significant strides. And as of today, we're almost completely full. We have 95% occupancy of those 72 units. And we have approved applications moving in to fill in those remaining units too, from a low point of about 65%. So that's been a huge stride. But I think more than that is just the fact that we've been able to have direct control over the interactions with all of our residents, and the good and the bad and everything in between. And when somebody loses a job, or even more recently, like, not a negative thing, but one of our residents' daughters just going to be the first one in the family to go to college, and she just got accepted into one of the HBCUs. And there were a lot of fees associated with the move down and orientation and the books and all that stuff. And she came to us and told us that she was going to be late with rent for that reason. And we said, yeah, you should, like, that's important to make sure that your daughter gets off to a good start, moving away from home for the first time. And so we said, we'll figure it out. We'll work with you. If you need to apply for emergency assistance, we'll fill out the application with you, and Leah can get in there and work a little of her magic too. And so it's good to know, like, those kinds of conversations would be happening without our knowledge, or we'd be brought in late when it had reached like a crisis point. And so we can manage those things a little bit more proactively. And so, yeah, that's a kind of a long-winded summation of our program at this point.
Well, thank you very much, Bill. It sure gave me a fuller understanding, and for a number of years, I was involved with volunteering there, and it sure brought me up to speed. I do want to mention to everyone that if you want to write a question or something, you can put it in the chat, but you're also welcome to raise your hand. This is kind of an open discussion. I will just start the discussion by saying that having read Evicted gives me a whole different perspective on what Bill's talking about here. And there's so many times we were reading the book where we were saying, oh, it's too bad that this family doesn't have more support, or they need more mental health care or social work care. And it makes me feel, wow, it must be an incredible job to supply all those needs for some of your residents.
Yeah, absolutely. And I, like, as I was saying before too, like, coming into the job, I mean, my background was in kind of emergency response and humanitarian programming, but I had managed large teams before, but never a situation in which we were really so hands-on and had so much kind of direct involvement by different partners who, as I was saying before too, had their own interests in mind, and that we understand that too. But yeah, it was just very eye-opening and really kind of crystallized a lot of the thoughts that I had while reading the book too. And yeah, it certainly came to life in a real way for me when I started working at UMCS.
It's an interesting role that UMCS plays here in relation to the characters in the book and the issues that were raised in the book, because UMCS is at once a landlord and it has to run this thing as a business because it has these equity partners and lenders that expect the bottom line to be there. At the same time, it's working with a population of people that are pretty much typified by some of the people in the book. Really challenged with one thing or the other. And there's just a host of challenges. Also, just not even being able to navigate the normal things of just being a tenant. So having the landlord hat on and having to be the landlord at the same time, having the ability to really provide these more wraparound services. I don't know. I think it's pretty unique in Milwaukee. There are other agencies that work in this space and do something similar, but not very many of them. Am I right, Bill?
Yeah, that's correct. I do think UMCS is really unique in the sense that not only are we the kind of social service agency, we do a lot of different social services too. I mean, it's pretty comprehensive, and what we don't do directly we endeavor to make sure we have available on site through other community partners or specialists. So we have a really strong partnership with Freighter and the Medical College of Wisconsin. So every week we have a community nurse on site at our food pantry who is there to provide kind of general health checkups, but also regular blood pressure screenings. We were able to welcome in Mental Health America of Wisconsin, who set up right at the beginning of this year a mental health community clinic in our building. So they had previously been operating from a downtown, like a Walker's Point location in a kind of nice neighborhood. And they had a clinic at MATC downtown. But as we know, like, to be really accessible to people in need, you've got to be present where they live. And so their director, to her credit, recognized that. And we, through kind of a relationship that had already existed with Leah, we were able to kind of figure out a situation to welcome them into our space. And so we are really proud of those partnerships because we know how valuable they can be, and we know that we're not experts in everything, and we need to rely on others for that assistance. But so not only do we provide all those services, but also, as Ann was saying, we're the landlords, and not only do, like, the investors need to be satisfied, but the guy who comes to replace the window that got shot out by somebody who, you know, drove by and, you know, shooting their gun in the air, like, that guy needs to get paid. You know, all the vendors who come to provide services for us, and City of Milwaukee expects to get paid for the water bills. They expect to get paid for their taxes, as you know. We do all that stuff, but then also we developed these properties too. So, you know, as a developer, a landlord, and a service provider, as Ann, you're saying, I don't know, there's very few agencies that do all of that. And I think it's something that distinguishes us, and that everyone who's been a part of UMCS throughout the years should be really proud of that.
Bill.
Yes.
No, I meant Bill Gay. He's the other Bill. Bill number 2.
Thank you. I just wanted to say to you, Bill, that something that was not present to me at all in the book Evicted is a word that you used repeatedly. At one point, I thought maybe I could count them, but you kept referring to compassionate service. And the word compassion is missing in so many ways from all that we read in the book Evicted. But I am so proud to say, as a United Methodist, that we are affiliated with an agency that holds that to be very, very, very important. Thank you for that.
Yeah. Well, thank you. It's important. I mean, I think anybody can run, anyone can be, well, not anybody. I certainly couldn't 2 years ago, but like, there are a lot of landlords out there, and there are a lot of people that get involved in developing housing for different reasons. But I do think that's what can and does and should continue to distinguish UMCS from others. Is we're trying to do this well in a professional way, but also in a way that serves a higher purpose.
Jack?
Bill, I assume you're familiar with Wisconsin United Methodist Foundation?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. I was on the board for a number of years. You know, they have what I would call house money. You know, churches invest in them, but they also have money that they have accrued over a number of years, and it's fairly significant. And I all I want to do is point out to you that your story is great. And I think if you haven't already, you should call those folks up and meet with the board and tell them your story. And maybe beyond that, begin to think about putting together how you could convince them to fund you in some aspect.
Yeah. Well, yeah, thank you very much for that, Jack. And the agency has had a relationship with the Wisconsin United Methodist Foundation for some time. And I think it's one that we've managed to kind of rekindle a little bit over the last year or so. We did get a grant from the foundation at the end of last year. Specifically, we requested it for our housing program to help us kind of stand up our own internal property management team. But as you're pointing out, I think that was towards the end of last year, so it's probably a good time for us to get back in touch and come very humbly with our hands open again.
Well,
Right.
we got about a $50,000 grant from the foundation for no, not next door. I keep thinking Next Door Foundation, but for
Northcott.
Northcott. And this was for a roof for their gym.
Right.
And this was kind of off a little bit of the, I guess, the goals of the foundation, but I think they were convinced that there are other ways in which they can use their money with organizations such as yours. And the other thing is, with the stock market the way it's been, they have been accruing significant dollars, I think, and now is a great time to touch them for some money.
Yeah. Well, very well taken. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
I see a question here in the chat from Walt and Sue. Bill, what are your hopes and dreams for UMCS for the future? Sue. Okay. Well, I think there are a lot of things. I mean, I think it was an unusual year, a year and a half now, really, I would say. And actually, so I moved into the permanent director's role in February of last year, and then within a month, everything was shutting down, and so it was really fortuitous timing, I would say. But really, I mean, I think we're lucky in many ways as a neighborhood-based social service agency in Milwaukee, in that we have the history and the backing of the church, and not just from the greater Milwaukee area, but throughout the state. And so that has allowed us to weather a lot of storms, and this was a particularly bad storm with the pandemic. But we saw, and I'm sure you had many similar experiences in your own lives too, that as disruptive and traumatic as it was in many ways, it also did bring out the best in a lot of people. And so there was a lot of uncertainty and unknowns at the outset, but we managed to kind of get through the worst of it, and fortunately we're all in all we're in pretty good shape. So we don't have any like existential concerns. We've managed to be able to provide a little bit more support for our staff, who are of course still a little underpaid and overworked, and we don't really have the benefits that we would the full range of benefits, but we have been able to bring on some additional support in those ways too. So I feel good about that trajectory, and we want to continue to be able to do that because the agency will continue to fulfill its mission and be good as long as we can recruit and retain good staff. You know, I think that's true for any organization or agency or business. And so that's a real emphasis and hope for the future that we can continue to do that. But I think programmatically and specifically around housing, what we have come to increasingly recognize in the Washington Park neighborhood and around the city is that the rental housing market that we service is a huge need and will continue to be a huge need, especially when you're talking about populations who are suffering with different ailments or, you know, homelessness. They're going to need rental housing. They're going to need really strong supportive services, the kind that we are able to provide. But what is really holding back a lot of neighborhoods is what we have seen over the last 20, 30 years in particular, which is really steep declines in the rates of home ownership in the Washington Park neighborhood and many other parts of the north side and south side of Milwaukee too, but really pronounced in the north, on the north side, and, you know, predominantly African American neighborhoods on the north side. And there are a lot of reasons for that, historical and you know, really kind of shameful moments in the history of banking and government and our society more broadly that has contributed to that. But I do think that we're seeing a real genuine interest in trying to address that crisis of home ownership. And I think the model that UMCS has and the way that we operate is valuable and has something to contribute to that effort. And so I think I would really, we've had some initial conversations about this with Ann and our task force and also with our board of directors. And I would love for UMCS to get into the kind of home ownership promotion sector. And I don't know exactly how that will play out, but I think there are a few different types of pilot programs that we can get engaged with, and that requires a lot of these similar type of funding arrangements that we use to develop our current housing programs, but would be more geared towards targeting families who have reached a certain level of stability and that can be convinced or made to see it as an attractive option to remain in that neighborhood. So yeah, I mean, it can become like a vicious cycle where people reach a certain level of stability, or maybe they break through with that educational attainment and they want to get out of the neighborhood, or in a lot of cases they want to get out of Milwaukee, and so that just kind of further erodes at the stability or the fabric of that community. And so I think the way that we can address that is by trying to strengthen our footprint and our campus and hopefully be a source of strength and stability building out from that. So that's a real kind of hope and dream, is while we continue to manage and operate our supportive housing program and serve those populations, how can we also, with a real mission-driven element to it, bring investors and others into the fold and see value in what we have to offer in creating a pathway to home ownership for people. So,
So, Bill, you didn't talk about this too much, but the stabilization of the Washington Park area is really critical, and UMCS is playing a role in that. But, you know, one of the things we saw in the book was just the erosion of community in general. And so I think UMCS really has a role in not only stabilizing that community, but for the kinds of hopes and dreams that Bill just talked about, so that it becomes a less transient and more committed, permanent community. That's not easy to recreate. I just would like to point, it was a good question, Walt, because I think we're only poised right now to be able to even think about what those hopes and dreams are. This last 2 years has been really moving from crisis to stability, and not just because of the pandemic, but because of just the nature of the thing, and needing to have the stabilization of the economics of the thing. But that's a good question for right now, because I think I'm really grateful that we're able now to start thinking about that. I think it's an optimistic time in the agency to even have its feet on the ground and be stable enough to start looking about for the next thing that makes sense for that community.
Esther, you've been wanting to ask a question.
Yes, I have a question about transportation. Is there easily accessible public transportation?
We are very fortunate to be located on one of the main thoroughfares that goes from the west side of Milwaukee out into Wauwatosa, and then back down all the way to downtown along Lisbon Avenue. And so we have a couple of bus stops right outside of our offices and outside of
Good.
housing that go both east and west, and then north. But yeah,
Well,
it is
yeah.
good.
Critical to getting to the job.
Absolutely.
Bob,
Bill, do you know if the city of Milwaukee promoted home ownership program is alive? HACM,
So
are they doing anything to promote home ownership?
they are definitely doing, they have a few different programs to promote new home ownership. And they also, they have a few programs to help with like down payment assistance, but they also have a number of programs that are geared towards helping low income families at different kind of income thresholds relative to the average median income for Milwaukee County remain in their homes too. So they do have a few of those programs that are geared towards helping new homeowners through education, down payment assistance, and that sort of thing. And then also through different types of grant programs, matching grant programs. So when someone needs a new roof, they can tap into some city finance to help them do that. They are usually programs where you have to bring a certain matching amount to that. But that's a time where, if somebody can't afford a match, they can maybe get some assistance from an agency like Habitat for Humanity or a business improvement district, or in Washington Park, we have a neighborhood improvement district that helps with about 12 to 15 home repairs each year. If you can get that assistance, that can be your match to city financing that you get. So we try and like link people up in that way so that they can do that. And we are able to help with that. We don't have our own financing to be able to do it, but we can help people understand what their options are and help them complete applications or introduce them to the people that run those programs because we know them. But so yeah.
It seems to me that, if this thing were to get, you mentioned the vicious cycle or the downward spiral, but if the neighborhoods start going up and becoming better places to live, you might wind up with being able to reverse the trend. And, that's obviously that's the goal of the program that the city has. But, it would be interesting to see it working in some areas.
Yeah, and it is starting to, especially in the MLK corridor, moving directly
Yeah.
north from downtown into Harambe, getting a lot of attention, which is great. There you see some concerns about like longtime residents being forced out because of rising property values and that sort of thing.
There are
Well,
some complaints about higher taxes.
Yeah, we are a long ways off from that in Washington Park, so we would welcome a little bit of gentrification in our but yeah, certainly. I know I can see Bonnie's been trying to get in too, so
I was wondering,
I'll call you later, Ellie.
okay, I was wondering if you could address or maybe help us a little bit with many of us, and doing evicted book is an example are becoming more informed and interested in Milwaukee. I've always said it, it's on our back doorstep or front doorstep, and we want to be able to do something. But the quandary we have, if you look at the Zoom, what are we, white middle class? And I think that presents a roadblock for us helping. And in general terms, not just UMCS, but generally, can you address that a little bit, and how do we maneuver that? How do we help with being the white middle class suburban people?
yeah, I mean, it's a good question, and I don't know that I have a great answer for that, but I will say this. I feel very fortunate to have been in a situation many times over in my life and career where I have been an outsider, whether it was working in Afghanistan or Haiti or Turkey or wherever. And I think those experiences have helped me, certainly helped educate me, and I think make me a more empathetic and compassionate person. But I've also learned that I feel like if you really approach a situation with a good heart and a willingness to listen and learn, and not come in with an attitude of I'm here to fix the problem, or being judgmental about people who are in a different and less fortunate situation than you are, that I think people recognize that if you can be genuine, I think people recognize that, and they will over time begin to trust you and accept you and allow you into being part of their lives, and hopefully part of their lives for the better, and making positive change. And so I think that's what people at UMCS do real well. And as I was saying before, Leah kind of leads the way on that. She's been there for 14 years. And everyone's kind of following in the footsteps and trying to emulate the way that Perry conducted himself for so many, many years. And I know that Leah certainly carries that torch, and I'm trying to do my best to follow in that way. And I think that's critical. But for more broadly, I think, yeah, these kinds of conversations are good. I think I'm hopeful for a time where it's easier to get people together in person and bring people from, whether it's Menominee Falls or Elm Grove or Whitefish Bay, to UMCS or to Northcott too, and to just be together and share experiences and learn something from that about how we can be better partners. And for some people, it might be volunteering, or maybe it's mentoring, or maybe it's contributing some of your financial resources to a cause. Everyone has to figure those things out for themselves, but I think to the extent we can do that together, and bringing people from different backgrounds together is important.
It
Thank
seems
you.
like I'm short on the patience thing, so it takes a lot of patience.
Yeah, it's not easy. It's not always easy. I mean, I can thinking back to a few conversations today, even where deep breaths and maybe go for a walk around the block every now and then.
So Bill, I'd like to ask a question. You referred to the downward trend in home ownership. I know, I think many of us are aware of the problems way in the past with redlining and things that were very detrimental to people of color having homes. I'm interested in your thoughts about why the recent downward trend in home ownership. And there's been a lot of coverage in the Journal Sentinel about housing in Milwaukee lately.
Mhm.
Do you see things either at the local, state, or national level? Do you see things that are trending, things that are actually making a difference and helping?
Yeah, really good question. I mean, I still consider myself a relative newbie in the sector, because I find myself in meetings and in conversations with people who have been working in this field for a long time. And I have to say, like, on the one hand, it's encouraging that they're still so dedicated to the cause, but on the other hand, I do hear a number of them say things like, we've been dealing with this same challenge for 30 years, and where have we come? And so I do think that this model that we've used for developing our housing program at UMCS has its real strengths, but it also has its flaws, in the sense that there's so much bureaucracy and kind of regulatory constraints that we face, that it pushes away agencies that are more neighborhood based and mission driven, because there's so many different types of expertise that you have to have, from the financial to the leasing and marketing to the compliance, to making sure that you don't do anything that would jeopardize the tax credits. And so that's pretty intimidating. And what I think it has led to is a lot of really larger professional profit driven firms to get involved in the field too. And not that there's not a role for that to take place, but it's really hard for those larger entities to have a one-on-one conversation with the mom who just sent her daughter to college for the first time, and to show her a little bit of compassion to get through the next month or two. And even as we look ahead and contemplate maybe getting a little bit larger, that's one of my considerations as well, is like, can we do more so we can serve more people without jeopardizing what I think is special about our program right now. And I think we can, but I just want to make sure that that's a real consideration for us. And so when we look at those long-term trends, it's discouraging. And I don't know that I've really come across or pinpointed a specific program that I think is going to help reverse those figures and lead to longer term success. But I'm searching for it, and our agency is. And in the meantime, I keep trying to remind myself, and I know we do it as a team too, and say, let's focus on what we can control. And we're not gonna change 30 years of history overnight, certainly. But if we come into work and focus and do what we know we need to do, we can make that family's life better this week, or that month, or for that trajectory that they're on. And that's something that means something.
Thank you. It's 8:35, and I don't want to keep Bill too long, but are there other things that people were thinking about that you'd like to bring up before we?
Oh, I'd like to ask one other question. Do you, have you ever had any training programs for how to do things? You talked about fixing things in the house. My own kids struggle with fixing this or that, or replacing things, and I just wondered if any of that is in your portfolio.
Yeah, we don't have any specific kind of workforce or job training programs for residents. We have our own facilities and maintenance coordinator on site who is responsible for the upkeep, and because of the nature of the program too, a lot of the stuff we need to make sure is done by kind of licensed professionals. Yeah. But yeah, I know that's a big part of, Northcott has been able to get into that kind of programming over the years, and it's a great pathway to
How to use a screwdriver.
Yeah,
Kind of a basic.
absolutely.
Hey, Bill, did you know whether your tenants have had access to any rental assistance as a result of the COVID money, in terms of, I know that we're still kind of hovering over that moratorium on eviction, but the money that everybody's wondering about, like, where is it going? Have any of your tenants actually gotten rent relief or support through any of those programs?
Yeah, absolutely. A number of residents have actually, I would say maybe like 25% or so. So yeah, it's maybe a little bit higher than that, anywhere from maybe up to like 20 residents. So, that's probably somewhere between 25 and 35% of residents. Those are big programs, and the levers of government never move too swiftly. But I am happy to say and to see that those programs have been stood up, and they've been overseen by community partners that we have relationships with. And so we've been able to facilitate the applications of a number of our residents. Some of our residents are on top of that stuff, and they got their applications in lickety split, but others, for different reasons, just aren't able to navigate that process as well. And so we've been able to do things like bring caseworkers from community advocates or Hope House on site to UMCS and go upstairs and say, hey, Miss Jones, come on down. This is your chance. We need you to fill out this application and get yourself squared away here. But yeah, those programs are operating. And so certainly we've been, and many of our residents have been beneficiaries of that pandemic emergency rental assistance.
Good.
It's not going to stay forever. There's always emergency rent assistance programming that predates the pandemic through different agencies, but it is, those programs have been much smaller and much stricter criteria for who could be eligible. So we've been through this really crisis period, and the funding has risen to meet those needs, but we know that is going to start going away.
Hey, any other questions for Bill? Well, I just want to say this has been a very enlightening for me. Again, from the standpoint of having read the book, just to appreciate the importance of what you're doing, and to, I guess, for me personally, be impressed with how well you're doing it. And as was said, it makes me happy to be part of the United Methodist Church that's supporting you. So thanks for being here. We did record this, folks. And for those that can't make it, if you hear that from people, I will put out through Janet Ray how we can make this available to folks. But I thank everyone for being here.
Thank you, Doug, and thank you, everybody. Appreciate the invitation, and I will look forward to hopefully seeing you all again soon, before too long.
Us also.
Hey,
Thanks, Bill.
Hey, Doug.
All right.
Thank you, Bill.
Bye, everyone.
Take care.
Good night.
Bye.
Good night.
Hi, Ann.
Good night.